Welcome. It's a miracle of technology. Yes. Welcome to the Empowered Author coaching sessions, live sessions with me and Katie Sadler. I'm so excited to have Katie on board because basically she knows a lot more than me, that's for sure. No, perhaps that's not true, but it is actually true. If you are seeing us, because this is our sort of first event and we're using a little bit of technology called Be Live, if you could just comment and say what your name is.
Yay, Kim!
Woo! Right, fantastic. So so basically this evening we're going to look at some of the basics of book marketing, and I've also respond to some of the comments that you've made along the way. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Katie, who I had the pleasure of working with at HarperCollins on quite a few different projects actually. And Katie is continued working freelance, but in the different big five publishers. She's worked on all kinds of best-selling authors' books and great marketing campaigns and won awards. So Katie, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience and working in the industry?
Hello. So I've been working in publishing for I think it's about 13 or 14 years. So I started at Ebury, working mostly on nonfiction, a tiny bit of fiction towards the end. And yeah, there I worked on like the Bake Off books, which were so fun, and Doctor Who, and like a lot of parenting books, which did not help me when I had children at all, sadly. And then I moved to HarperCollins, where I worked on the fiction side, and there I worked on like S.J. Paris, Charles Cummings, Cecilia Ahern. I helped a lot of people. I helped a lot of authors at Harper Fiction like get onto Twitter. You know, when that whole thing was starting off, I don't know when that was, like 7-8 years ago. So like literally just setting up their account and showing them how to use it. And then then I was at Quercus, where I worked on Ellie Griffiths, Sarah Knight, some like so really fun authors. And then since 2018, so in 2018 I was like half in-house and half freelance, and then in 2019 I went fully freelance. And now I work with publishers and authors on marketing campaigns, and also I do a lot of author support, like helping them to set up their social media, their author platform, figure out what to talk about on their blog and their newsletter and that kind of thing. So that's what I do.
A lot of experience, fantastic. And in terms of the Great British Bake Off, have you been watching this series, Katie?
No, you know what? When it left BBC, I stopped watching it.
Oh no, it's been so good. It's been so good. And also, every time I watch it, I can't help thinking, oh, he's going to be so good in a cookbook. He'll be perfect. The publishers will love him or love her. Right, so just welcome again to anyone who has just joined. Please do post your name and feel free to put questions there. We are going to cover a lot of ground, I hope, but also happy to sort of pick out a few questions. So we did say that we were going to talk about getting the basics right. So Katie, in your experience, obviously you've worked with lots of authors and on lots of campaigns. So I guess over and over again, you're presented with a new book and told, come up with a marketing plan. So where do you start when you're given a new book?
So, to start with is to, know the book. But I think with everybody being authors here, hopefully you know the book quite well. And then to think about like who the reader is. I think that is really the key thing to figure out, like who's the person who's going to really love this book. And a lot of people who I've worked with over the years, not just sort of self-published authors or, like people who have had lots of different books, they tend to think that their book is for a super broad audience, which it might be that like a book gets read by lots and lots of different people. But actually, I think it's helpful to be as specific as possible when you're thinking about who your reader is. It's the one thing it is not is like it's not for everybody. And you can't say like, right, who's my reader? I think it would appeal to like anybody over about 18. It's all adults will enjoy this book. Maybe like lots of them will, but in terms of marketing, that's actually really unhelpful, because then you don't have anywhere to start in terms of thinking about like, how am I actually going to find those people? So once you know a little bit about who the reader is, and you can think about like where they're from, how old they are, like those kind of general demographics. You know, are they male, are they female? You have those sort of general demographics, and then you can also think about, like, you know, what do they like doing with their spare time? Like, do they have any hobbies? What else do they do? What other books do they read? And that's kind of, I think, a question that Sam asked, which I think is really good, is like, if you took your book into a shop, you know, like, what other books would it sit alongside? Like, so if that person wasn't going to buy your book, what other book could they pick up? And just knowing that it's kind of like who the reader is, and also like who their market is really an important place to start, I think.
Yeah. So in publishing, we talk a lot about comp authors, don't we? So comparable, competitive, however you want to call them. So like Katie said, this is about sort of where your book will sit in a bookshop. Who else caters to your type of readers? So who would you naturally sit with? Also thinking about, obviously, on Amazon and other ebook platforms, which categories your comp authors are in. So if you think, actually, you know, I probably would appeal to Jill Mansell's readership. So, you know, start looking at sort of Jill Mansell as your starting point. Hopefully, for your book, it's useful to get, say, 4 or 5 or 6 comp authors that you can use. And it's a really good way of stopping that sort of overload of, you know, like Katie said at the beginning, of thinking like, well, everyone might enjoy this book, or every woman might enjoy this book, you know, equally. Like, how can you market to every woman? But how can you market to women who might like, you know, commercial fiction, like Jill Mansell's readers, like Katie Ford's, you know, whoever. So you can start going into more of a targeted approach, and every sort of digital marketing technique requires a drilling down for you to be focused. So when it comes to doing things like adverts on Facebook or Amazon, sort of targeting your, you know, comp readers, your comp authors readership is one key element to targeting the right people. Is that fair to say that, Katie, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think like another thing I've heard is that, you know, my book is totally unique and it's not like anything else out there, which is great in a way, because it means when somebody reads it, you know, they'll have a unique experience and they're probably gonna love it. But when you're talking about like before they've picked it up, it is still useful to think about what comparisons you could find, even if they don't have to be exact, you know, but like, can you position it alongside, it's kind of like in this vein of book, even if it's not exact, because it just helps you narrow down a bit on who you're speaking to and how you're going to speak to them about the book. Because if it's unlike anything they've ever heard of, they might be less like, it will be a much bigger barrier for them to pick it up. Whereas if it's kind of like, oh, I really enjoyed that book, okay, yeah, I might give it a go, then it just gives them like an extra bit of information, an extra bit, a way of just, you know, it's positioning the book for the reader. I think in publishing, like in-house, we often talk about positioning in terms of like retailers. A big part of it is like, you know, positioning it for the reader. And that's thinking about like the comp authors, and then that kind of leads into, you know, like what the book is about. So as I said, like as the author, you know what the book is about, but like how can you bring the kind of like the essence of the book out for the reader in a way that they're gonna get excited to read it?
Yeah. I mean, certainly a lot of authors, I know this is not true of all authors, but certainly lots of authors that I meet, you know, that I've met at different events, I will say, you know, oh, what's your book about? Or tell me about your book. And then there's sort of a lot of kind of embarrassed mumbling or sort of, so, you know, I would say practice that, you know, that, because actually it is important for you to be able to, in any context, communicate with passion, which you obviously have for your book, on behalf of your book, and, you know, leave that person thinking, oh, actually that sounds cool, I like the sound of that story, you know, I'd like to know more about it. So definitely practice, you know, and I my sort of thought is always have like one line that you could potentially say, but then also, if you're in a different context, a couple of lines to explain a little bit more about the narrative of your book. Thinking about comp authors in the non-fiction area, so, you know, if we were looking at books about cookery or self-help or gardening or business books. In terms of targeting your readership, in many ways that's even easier than for fiction, because, you know, in terms of having a sort of hobby, you know, if we consider things like photography or cookery as a hobby, obviously there are lots of ways that you are already congregating around your hobby or your interest. So that might be in a Facebook group, it might be a real life gardening club, or so actually it's easier to identify where your potential readers might be, whether that's in a social media setting or in a real life setting, or indeed, obviously, they might watch Gardener's World, they might listen to it on the radio. So actually building up a sort of kind of landscape of, excuse the pun, of your audience, what they do, what they watch, what they read, what they, you know, the Facebook groups that they're, you know, they're active in. This will all help you to understand who will be attracted to your book. So, yeah, do you have other things in terms of nonfiction, Katie?
I mean, I think nonfiction is interesting, and it's a good. I'm trying to explain this I think this is like, it's further down. What I'm trying to say is further down the line. So maybe we'll come back to it. But
okay,
I think that it's really, like, nonfiction is really fun in terms of audiences, because it's quite easy. It's quite easy to find them on social media. Like, yeah, as you say, like I'm more likely to talk about my garden, and I work in publishing. I'm more likely to talk about like my kids, or I don't know, my work or whatever, than like specifically show the books that I'm reading and tag them with the author and all the rest of it. So it's easier to find me by the other things I'm interested, rather than like specifically the authors. So that's, I mean, that is across fiction and nonfiction. Like, you know, it's much easier for nonfiction, because that's my behavior.
Yeah. Do post if you
just ask a question about what I said before. And just to say, if you've not used Be Live before, there's a link that you can click to like put your name in. Otherwise, it's just going to say Facebook user. So sorry if I'm just calling you Facebook user. That's the only reason why. So if someone says Facebook user says, should I stop using this as my hook to get readers interested in? And it's a quote from someone called Carlo Gebler, which says, remarkable, I've never read anything quite like it. I definitely don't think you should stop using that as your hook, but I think it should probably go along with something else. So that's that's one way into it. And then another way into it, which is kind of like, it doesn't need to be like, this book is like, if you like this book, you'll also like this book, but just to make it like clear, you know, is it fantasy? Is it crime? I mean, that quote is really lovely, but I don't know from reading that, like, what kind of book it is. It could be anything, really. It could be like a kid's book. Just find another way of showing like what kind of book it is.
Yeah, and I think also if you have highlighted who your target audience is through the other ways that we've discussed, then you can still use a quote like this, because that may appeal to some of your target audience. That is a strange and original and unusual novel. That will definitely appeal to some people who, you know, are excited by that. So that, like Kate said, that's part of how you would market something that maybe sits between genres or is slightly indefinable. But I suppose, you know, what we're saying is that shouldn't make it completely impossible to do your marketing by thinking, actually, you know, I'm a unique book that straddles genres and doesn't, you know, fit into any, if you like this, if you'll love this sort of thing. So you will still need to think of audiences to target to get your message across, because the message is good, but it's only good if you have an audience to push it out to, so that hopefully it appeals. But so if anyone wants to sort of comment about the book, you know, the genres they write in, if there are any non-fiction authors out there, be interested in what area of non-fiction, and obviously, especially if you have any particular questions about sort of marketing and finding your audience, you know, if we haven't made it clear about comp authors, or if you know who your comp authors are, please post some comments, because it is nice to actually get some real authors talking to us. So I'm writing in upper mid-grade folk horror. Wow, it's Midsummer Times crossed with the Moomins. Well, I'm in. In.
You can picture it exactly. I can picture exactly what that is.
Selena, that's great. And if you want to sort of follow up with how you've been marketing it or any challenges you've had, that'll also be really interesting. Geomancer and Katie Ford. Cool. So in terms of being, you know, we've talked about you having a book given to you and saying, come up with a marketing campaign. Obviously, there are elements around the audience. So we've talked about that. So in terms of then, how do you sculpt your sort of creative marketing, your messaging about your book to appeal? How do you sort of go about that, Katie?
I mean, I'm lucky because in marketing, we start from the point where we already have a blurb. Right. So, 9 times out of 10, I've also read the book. Not always, but 9 times out of 10, I've also read the book. So I can like combine the blurb with like what I know about the story into something. Yeah. But I find that bit really fun. Like coming up with taglines is really fun for me. Because essentially what I do is just like spend an hour and write down as many often terrible ideas as I can, and then like whittle it down from there. And part of that is because I have been working in this area for a long time. So like I know the kind of, a man, a something else. Like there's like a formula to taglines, which is not very. It's not like revolutionary, but it is. It does make it a bit easier because I have like read so many of them over the years. So I think one thing that would be helpful if you've not like paid attention to them before. So if you might have read loads in your genre, but like probably haven't been paying attention to specific taglines that authors are using on their front covers and on their Amazon pages. Yeah. So what I would do is when you have those comp authors, just like really like dive into their Amazon pages and have a look at like what they've used as a tagline, but also like those kind of top reviewers will often put a shouty headline as their top line review. Those are really, really great to read because you can also see like what readers of authors who are in your genre are saying that they like about those books. And those are great things that you can like pull into your own blurb, but also your shout lines as well.
Yeah, that's a really good tip actually, is to use the language of readers rather than sort of marketing people, because they do different jobs, basically. So I was going to say one is better than the other. I don't think it's necessarily true. I think they both do different jobs. But so in terms of, to keep going back to, the comp authors, Katie's right. It's an incredibly useful resource is to think, okay, right, I've got my 6 authors. I've got Jill myself, I've got Katie Ford, I've got 4 others who cross over in my readership, in my space. Get a big Excel spreadsheet or a big Word document open and have a look at all, good few of Jill Mansell's books, her taglines on the cover of her books. Like Katie said, go into the blurb. Blurbs are really important and really useful. See how they have, used endorsements from other authors, but also obviously reviewers and bloggers endorsements, and which ones they pulled out. But also read their blurb in terms of how they write it so that they give enough of the story away to make you interested in it and leave you thinking, oh, well, what does happen to that character? Or how is that going to play out? Or, God, I want to read it because it's given me enough. So, that is quite a skill to do that. But certainly look at the people who do really well in your genre. You will pick up tips straight away. And often in their page, also, publishers will have posted the creative, the Facebook, not necessarily Facebook ads, but Twitter ads or banners. So have a look at those, and they're usually quite sort of like striking with one pull-out quote. And my personal view about marketing is a lot of things. You do not need to start from scratch. You look at what successful authors are doing. Kind of cherry pick the ideas that work for you, and adapt it to your colors, your aesthetics, your book. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. The reason why publishers are doing things in certain ways is in the main because it works. So there is no point thinking, oh, I know, I completely reinvent the whole way of doing it. So there's an awful lot you can learn from your comp authors, and certainly thinking, again, go into Google and search on their names and search on their names plus review or their names plus preview to get, people who talk about their books ahead of time and see who is talking about those books. So that's another whole bit of your sort of audience you can start piecing together, which is who reviews my, people in my space. All right, okay. Chances are if you're starting out, you're probably not going to get exactly the same high level people as Jill or Katie reviewing your books, but you can still build up a landscape, and there will be specific bloggers who will review their books, and again, put them all in a big spreadsheet because it's all really useful. And this is whether you are a self-published author or a traditionally published author. There's no reason for you to not do this work as well to support what your publisher is doing. So is there anything else around that, Katie?
No, I mean, I think just in terms of the the bloggers and stuff like that, I think that's something else that I would say, even as soon as kind of who, well, I guess that's the next step, isn't it? So once you know who your reader is and you've kind of got your message, the next thing is to think about how you can get that message in front of your reader. So who are the people who are influencing your reader, and how can you work with them? And I think one thing that people do often is that they will have a big spreadsheet of people, and then they'll just blast out a message saying, I've got this new book, do you want to work together? I'm sure it'll be a lovely email, but it will just be quite a generic email. Whereas what I would suggest is that if you only had 15 minutes a day to market your book, I would actually spend it on building relationships with people so that they know, that you're an author, and they know that you have a book coming out, and they so that they're not completely, it's not coming out of the blue when you email them and they actually recognize your name. So that might seem a bit cynical, but I do think that social networking is really a key part of that. And it is just the same as, in the olden days when you would go to an event, the Future Book was on Friday and loads of people were networking at Future Book, so it's thinking about it in that way. It's not just about telling, blasting out about your book. It's also building relationships with people. So, speaking to them about what they're doing, finding out what they're looking, what they're interested in, and knowing actually, that person is probably not a great fit for my book. I won't speak to that person about it, but this person who I didn't know about before, this person's a great fit. So I'll send them a direct message. We're already in conversation about something else, so it's not that this is the first time they've ever heard from me and they're just, it's not expected, because I think otherwise you're just coming in cold. Whereas if you've already started building the relationship over time, then it's much warmer and it's much easier to get them to show interest.
And certainly, actually one of the comments we had from someone joining the group was that and there's a similar comment here about being sort of embarrassed about plugging your own book, that sort of awkwardness of kind of, sort of, I don't know, just the awkwardness of sort of trying to flog your book, that it's embarrassing and blah, blah, blah. So I hear this quite often from authors. And I think, to go back to what Katie said about the sort of networking side, in terms of sort of if you are absolutely starting from scratch on social media, I mean, my personal view is you should start on Twitter if you can, unless you find it impossible and you're naturally really good at Facebook and you're building a little bit of a community on Facebook, that's fine. Twitter has basically everybody of influence, of importance in the book industry. So see it as a challenge to connect with those people. So, like Katie said, if you're not sure where to start, or you're uncomfortable knowing what to tweet about, certainly I would say, be a sort of voyeur on there to start off with. I mean, lots of people do this the whole time. So, go in, follow a lot of people in the book industry, a lot of other authors, find your comp authors, follow them, have a good look at who they're tweeting with regularly, follow them. So in terms of getting started, do some of that, but before you sort of then obviously find the confidence to tweet about stuff. You do not have to tweet about sort of embarrassing, private things on Twitter, and I think that's something I hear, you know, in a lot of training I've done with authors, that they worry that they've got to sort of say things about, you know, their family or what they eat or where they live or blah blah blah. You do not have to do that. There are lots of ways to express your passions and your interests without revealing private information of any kind. So obviously, if you go to bookshops, take some photos of your book in the bookshops and tweet about them. Tweet about your writing challenges or what you're enjoying. But you know, but also just have a look at what other authors are tweeting about. And like I say, cherry pick the things that work for you. Don't try to create a persona that you're not, because you have to sustain that forever, which is, you know, too hard. So you know, be honest with yourself about what you're happy to tweet about. You know, have you seen something interesting in The Guardian, or something you read in the newspaper, or something, you know, you read elsewhere that you want to sort of, you know, like tweet about? Have you seen another author say something about a book that you really love, that you can then say, oh, actually, yes, I love that. I read that when I was, you know, a teenager, and blah blah blah. You know, all of those sort of just normal, is it normal social media? It's not normal, really, is it? But you know, as normal as it can be, and an authentic, I mean, we say that a lot, authentic relationships and authentic kind of engagements. Quite quickly, you will, you know, if you are on it regularly, you will start seeing the people who are potentially useful, like Katie says, potentially useful specifically for your book. And, you know, so make sure you follow those people and start, you know, just engaging with some of the things that they say. And then they will recognize your name when it comes to you emailing them and saying, you know, is there any way that you could read my book or review my book or blah, blah, blah. So, you know, starting from zero is really, really hard. But equally, you know, a kind of writing career is a long road. And, you know, there is, you know, if people tell you there's a very quick way to get a huge audience, a very quick way to sell a gazillion books, please don't believe them, because, you know, I've not actually seen that to be the case for any author to just come in and build everything in one go. So this is about, you know, thinking long term about your writing career, thinking long term about the relationships that you build. And obviously, the longer you are engaging with people, you know, you will meet these people in real life. You can form collaborations with other authors and have your own Zoom chats. You know, authors in general are incredibly supportive of other authors. So, you know, sort of leverage that, and then further down the line, hopefully you'll help people who are coming through. So social media, you know, has its shortcomings, that's for sure. But certainly if you use it carefully, and, you know, it should return, you know, some really useful insights as well to you. So right. So is there anything you want to add to that, Katie, or should we talk about, you know, I mean, we've touched on social media, and social media is sort of part of what an author needs. So if a debut author comes to you with their book, you've addressed, you know, sort of thinking about their book marketing. You know, what do you advise authors in terms of their platform, or what do they need? What are the basics?
Well, I think you know, there's a few questions you have to kind of ask yourself, which is, you know, what kind of medium do you best communicate in? So if Twitter, I think Twitter is great for book publishing industry, but like maybe actually who you want to reach are like lifestyle influencers, you know, in which case you're probably better to be on Instagram. If you have a very, very young audience, you might be thinking about TikTok, but that's like, because that's all video, that's, I mean, I'm personally like, oh God, I can't think of anything worse. But I know lots of people doing really successfly, and you know, within publishing, like we have started to use it as well, and like it can be really effective at reaching a large group of people. But it's just thinking about like what are the platforms that will work best for you. I always think that everybody should start with like a hub of some kind. So whether that's like a blog or a newsletter, I mean, I definitely recommend a newsletter, just something to like direct people to, so that you can own that relationship a bit more. Just because social media is great for many reasons, but actually, you know, I've just seen it on Instagram so many times over the past few years, like people just being locked out of their account with no warning, and then just losing all of their followers. And then you're in this like endless queue to try and get your account back. So it's not really ideal if you spent like, you know, days and months building up these followers, and then they take them from you all of a sudden. So while social, and then, you know, Twitter, it can go down, you know, what if it goes down like on your launch day? They're all great, but they should be like if you're building a cake, they'd be like the really lovely decorations on the top, you know, whereas actually like the foundations need to be about like having somewhere that show I know that also websites are very passé, you know, but I still just think that you need to have somewhere that says like, this is who I am, these are all of my books, and then a few sort of like key articles that might bring people to you from, you know, a search engine point of view, and the newsletter. Because newsletters are still like, I think in like Twitter, social media conversion rates are something like 2%, and newsletter is like something like 10%. I'll look into the statistics for that. But it's like, it's a huge difference. So even if like the numbers who are on your newsletter is much smaller, they're more engaged people.
And actually that issue of sort of small numbers, because I think I've had lots of sort of questions about newsletters and how do you build the audience, blah, blah, blah. And we'll definitely go into that in more detail in another one, but I will touch on it now. But you do not need tens of thousands of subscribers on your newsletter for it to be an effective thing to have. So shall we just touch on the tools that authors can use if they haven't even contemplated a newsletter? Because I know I use MailChimp, which is quite a common thing across the industry, but it's quite an expensive tool once you have over a certain number of people. There's MailerLite, which I know a lot of authors like as well. You use something else, don't you, Katie?
Yeah, I use something called Flowdesk, which you do pay for from the beginning. So there's no like free to start bit. So I think it's quite a good thing like to move on to. And I just find it really, I don't know, it's really easy to use.
Yeah, well, that's important.
Pretty.
Yeah. And then there is Substack, which is something you might have heard people talking about quite recently, which is something you don't pay for. You use their platform, and it is quite useful, but it's kind of limited in terms of you can't do things like segment your audience into different groups. It's kind of a limited format what you can do in terms of what the newsletter looks like, but it is still, so do check it out. And you can also have a free offer and you can charge your audience. So obviously I would recommend you start with a free to build up the numbers. It's very easy for people to sign up to. It's really user friendly. So look at Substack, and that might be an option if you don't want to go through the thing of actually signing up to an email management system. And then in terms of a website, I mean, what do you recommend for your authors in terms of what tools that they use to build their website? Or
so it's generally either WordPress, so self-hosted WordPress, which can be a bit, I mean, it can be a bit fiddly to set up, some people think, but it's basically you just watch like a YouTube video or two and then you'll be sorted. It's actually not very complicated once you're in it. Or Squarespace. Some people use Wix, but I think Wix is less good for SEO. So if you're using it for SEO purposes, I think it's one of the other two is probably better. Although I'm sure Wix are improving. And
that's search engine optimization, if anyone doesn't know.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So I have definitely seen people use Wix. Personally, I always look at them and I can always see like Wix.com at the top, which always really puts me off, but I'm sure there's a way of getting rid of that. But I use Squarespace for my websites, and the fact that I have managed to create a website that doesn't look hideous suggests that anyone can, because I have no coding skills, no skills basically. But and also the other absolute gem of a resource, which I'm sure most of you are using, is Canva. .com, which pretty much everything I put, everything creative, every asset, every sort of little thing that I dot around on my different websites or social media I've created on Canva. So maybe we will go into that. I hope some of you are using that already. There is it's free and you get a huge amount on the free sort of option, and if you increase up to being a pro, you then get other things which are incredibly valuable, but the free is completely sufficient to do a huge amount of work. And again, if you're not sure how to use it, lots of videos to help you and that sort of thing. So in terms of the author platform, so we have a website which covers the basics of who are you, your books, how people get in contact with you, and please sign up to my newsletter. Also, I think it's worth sort of saying that actually, you do want the website to reflect your genre. So aesthetically, without sort of going over the top, you do not want, if you're a crime author, you don't want a pink website, et cetera, et cetera. So, so if you're a business book author, go and have a look at your wonderful comp author websites and see what you like, and cherry pick the things that you think, oh, I can do that. And yeah, that's kind of the sort of, design branding that I think would suit me. And again, if it's a crime author, obviously you want to have some of the crime aesthetics, so that, don't let people, you don't want people who come to your website to have to guess that you're an author. It's like you want something which basically, screams your genre. So screams YA or romance, has your book covers, and potentially has your sign up front and center, first thing that they get to. That is what I would recommend that you have. And then if they want to look around your site, obviously a very clear navigation to get to, contact you, about you, potentially a media kit, when you're a little bit further along the line, which would be, potentially include a press release and some of your author photos that you download, high resolution of covers. So, think about all of the potential people who might come to your website. And that could be all kinds of people. So it could be agents, it could be readers, it could be booksellers, it could be literary festivals. Is it clear when they click on something, what would they potentially want to know? Why would a literary festival be coming to you? And do you answer some basic things for them? So again, always think about your audience when you're doing that, because obviously, as we all know, you get seconds of attention from people. So make sure you give them the basics to explain who you are. And it sounds a bit like sucking eggs, but believe me, I have looked at an awful lot of author websites, and sometimes it's incredibly confusing, or people have incorporated it with their other professional jobs. And it's sort of like, well, how do I get, who are they and how do I get to them, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so make it really simple. So
yeah, sorry, just on that point, I think nonfiction in particular, that can be an issue, because usually the book is like an add-on to whatever this person's already doing. So I've seen it be quite buried. So it's like it's on the home page, but you have to scroll down and down and down and down and down. And there's no like book section. Or they might call it, instead of calling it book, they might call it like musings online. They might call it the book title, which is like nothing to do with
exactly.
Just make it really clear, just super easy. Where's their book? Where's their book? Great.
Yeah, completely. Had a good question then. Oh, so go back to newsletters about content. What should you put in a newsletter? What I would say about this is, every author that I work with, and I'm sure Katie is the same, is to think sort of beyond the newsletter. So what you don't want to do is to think, I know, I'll send a newsletter every month, and you get to the end of the month, the beginning of the month, and you're like, oh God, what am I going to put in my newsletter? That's what you don't want to do, because actually then it becomes a sort of kind of albatross that you think, oh God, I've got to do my newsletter in 2 days, haven't got anything to go into it. So a much better way of approaching this would be to, Excel spreadsheet or some form of spreadsheet, that you plan out your
piece of paper is fine too.
And you plan, what we would call your sort of content marketing plan or your content plan, and your newsletter will be, so if you put your months across the top, I don't know how Katie does this is how I do, months across the top, and then all of your different sort of places where you will want to put some content. So that could be a blog post on your website. It could be, something that you're writing for someone else. You might have, you might be posting on a blog. You might have a blog tour planned, and you will have your newsletter, and then your social media, and probably other things that I've missed out. But anywhere where you want output, that will be part of your marketing plan. Across in your months, then, obviously, put in when your book is being published or any other sort of key sort of elements of your sort of output in terms of your book. That's always my starting. I don't know about you, Katie. What is that sort of?
I'm going to show you what I've done for myself, which is literally like, I have this book, right? And every 3-4 months, this is about 2 months. I just write a list of stuff.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to like, I've got to write a newsletter, I just pick something from the list. So I just have one brain dump.
Yeah.
Where I just spend a lot of time coming up with ideas. And like sometimes if the idea is like, oh, I want to write about this thing specifically, it might even have bullet points and be outlined. That does happen occasionally. And then, when it comes to writing the newsletter, it's just like, right, let me just get the notebook out. I'll pick something from the list. And then that's what I write about, unless something else has come up. What I tend to find is that actually something will come up and I'll just write about something else completely. But I have that as like my backup.
Yeah. And I think
it's kind of a similar thing. It's just a, different format.
And I think if you, in terms of sort of, my sort of view on a kind of author newsletter template is to have some short introduction. I have it on my newsletter, which is kind of like something topical. So my last newsletter, I talked a tiny little bit about Halloween, and obviously now it would be Christmas or blah, blah, blah. So or something else that's happened, in the news or whatever you choose, something related to your book, perhaps. So something personal to you. So you might have spoken at a literary festival, so I would potentially incorporate that in your intro. And then in terms of sort of content that lots of authors have across the rest of their newsletter, obviously you want to talk about your book, so you might have a cover reveal in your newsletter. You might have, my audiobook has come out this week. You might have a book blog tour that you want to talk about. You might be doing live events that you want to reference. So you should have, as an author, some key things that are happening through your year that either your publisher has set up for you or you've been setting up if you're a self-published author. So put those in your big calendar and know that each month of your newsletter to pick one of those related to that particular month. Also, obviously, think about what I call like the hallmark days. So, if obviously your book lends itself to Valentine's Day, obviously you want to talk about that potentially in your end of January newsletter, your beginning of February newsletter. The same if you're talking about self-help, sober October or going dry in January, link that. So I would say think about there are a significant number of days that might relate to your book as well. And you could potentially run a small competition around, a couple of those sort of, well-being and health days that are sort of awareness days. And, you could potentially tie your book in with that. And again, you could do that on your social media and then also incorporate it in your newsletter. So if you build up some sort of framework, then at least when you come to think, oh, actually, okay, I've got quite a lot going on in May, so I should have plenty to put in my newsletter in May. And June has got a couple of things, so maybe I should run a competition in June because I don't have a lot of stuff. Do you know what I mean? So try and piece it together. And if you can get to a point where you look at your plan and think, okay, well, I've got like 40% of it planned out already for the next 3 months or 6 months or however long you want to work ahead, and then as you go through, you should then be able to drop in what Katie has said is, think about other things that you notice. If you notice somebody else doing something, you think, oh, I might write about that, that'll spur a little idea about a blog post, or you might have tried TikTok and had some success and you might want to write a little blog post about that, or whatever it happens to be. So then fill in with those. That's sort of roughly how I would approach a sort of content plan that will help you know what to post on social media, and also your newsletter. I hope that's helpful. Are there any questions specifically around newsletters and content, or the sort of challenges you have with them, or any other questions? So we have our newsletter, our website, social media, depending on sort of where we're happy, where we think it's most useful, where we think our audience is. Are there other elements, Katie?
Well, just on the newsletter thing, the other thing is to just keep that reader in mind, like things that they're interested in. So so Katie Ford, this is like really long time ago now, but Katie Ford, I remember she did a book that was set in the Bake Off. And this was when I was working on the Bake Off. So I was working with Cornerstone on it. We were doing like cross-publisher partnership. It was very exciting. It never happens. But because her book was about like being set in a bake-off, she was like, oh, do you think that, well, her marketer was like, do you think that we could use a couple of recipes from your book? And I was like, absolutely, brilliant. So, you know, if your reader is interested in like cookery or gardening or whatever, like you can also include a bit about that. It doesn't have to be always specifically about your book. You think about like what they will get out of it as well. Because I think that newsletters are weird because people often feel like they don't like showing up on social media and selling all the time, but then they will use their newsletter to like only when the book is out, which is effectively like you're only selling a selling message to that person. So just think about like how you can kind of give value to your reading.
Exactly.
What they're going to get out of the newsletter. And it doesn't need to be anything like huge. It doesn't need to be like essays or, you know, free something every single month. But it could just be like behind the scenes. You know, that's really interesting and that is valuable. But,
and actually, someone has asked, what if you're not doing anything, you're just starting out? I would say certainly get everything else in place before your newsletter, potentially have an ability to sign up for your newsletter. But, you know, sort of as and when things start, it's probably then worth kicking in a newsletter. But like Katie said, talking about behind the scenes or your writing motivation and all of that, you know, people are really genuinely interested in that. So you will pick up some, I call them fans, but readers. And like I say, these there are all kinds of ways that you can then use this audience, use and abuse them. But you know, it doesn't have to be thousands and thousands of subscribers. So there are lots of examples of self-published authors who, you know, will have created a newsletter, be sending it out, and then they sort of have a hardcore group of fans of theirs who they then will send early copies of their books to get feedback on their books. They will help them launch their book. So they will sort of have them what they call their street team. So they will then say, okay, my book is going to go live on this. If you can, you know, all help me on social media on this particular day. So, you know, there are all kinds of ways. And, you know, there's something really kind of powerful about getting people into your gang, into your group, into, you know, people, great self-published authors who use this successfully call them like their VIP team or their street team or their club, or, you know, they have all kinds of ways of saying, actually be part of my gang, you know. And then in terms of adding value, there are lots of ways you can give them things that are sort of exclusive, you know. So as in when, if you create some merchandise, or you can give them a signed book, or, you know, lots of ways you can do that without it being, you know, incredibly expensive. So think about it in terms of that. I would say that's probably the next stage after basics, is when you have a few fans and you start getting a sense of what sort of feedback. But definitely always ask for some feedback from them, because you then build that sort of two-way relationship. And, you know, if people have made the effort to sign up to your newsletter, they are very, very good prospects to buy your book, because, you know, you don't sign up to newsletters for no reason. You know, you think, oh, actually, that is good. I like the sound of that book, or I like the sound of that author. I will sign up. So they're really, really good prospects. They're much more valuable than your Twitter following or your Facebook following or your Instagram following. So, you know, do bear that in mind. Do we have any few questions before we wrap up?
Before we go back to, so Emily's asked a question about not having very much social media. So she finds self-promotion a little challenging. Her book is about mental illness and addiction and the impact on family. So it's a memoir about this, most memoirs about the subject of celebrities. What's the best way to be seen and heard? I think if you haven't already got a proper platform of any kind, or if you've got like a minimal platform, you need to go back to the key questions, which are who is the reader for this? What is your book about? And how can you get that book in front of them? So if you haven't got a platform, think about who else has got a platform in this area. So are there people who are blogging in this area that you can reach out to? Are there, you know, Instagrammers who are talking about this stuff, people on Twitter who are talking about this stuff? Even if you don't have a super active, you know, thousands of followers, you can still start building those relationships. And then are there podcasts on this subject that you can reach out to? I think it starts to kind of go then more into like the publicity side, but it is definitely, you know, it's about trying to find other people who have platforms and find how you can get on their platforms. And also really looking at your Amazon metadata, because this is a subject that people don't really talk about a lot publicly. So it's something that people are searching for a lot. So that, you know, you can look at your Amazon blurb copy and your categories, and also like you can create some really good content on your own website, which is specifically created for search, because you will have people who are searching for that kind of content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will go into more detail about Amazon metadata, which I think just roughly means kind of everything around sort of describing and positioning your book. Is that a good way of describing it? Yeah. So obviously that lends itself to, like Katie said, how and what people search for. So, you know, are people searching for self-help, you know, like, or are they searching for, I've had a mental health breakdown and can you help me? That sort of thing, you know, it's sort of like the actual things people search for, as opposed to thinking, do people really put in self-help book? Yeah, so we could go into that in more detail. Do we have any other questions? Right. What is the best way to approach influencers to share your book with their audience during launch week, given they probably receive a lot of requests?
Yeah, I mean, I think having an existing relationship, massively helpful, because the thing about influencers is often they have closed inboxes, or like the really, really big ones, you have to like reach out via their agent or whatever. Some of them will have closed inboxes, and some of them, like, all the messages will go to the other inbox if they haven't already had like a little exchange with you. And that other inbox that's on Facebook, on Instagram, they've got these like hidden inboxes. I don't know, it's the most annoying thing because I miss emails, I miss messages all the time. But yeah, it's kind of like having that pre-existing relationship is really good. And I know that's probably not helpful because I expect that's probably like imminent. If you're saying in launch week, it's probably like next week or something. So I'm sorry,
yeah,
it's really helpful. But just reach out to them. I mean, yeah. Just give them a really compelling reason why you think they would like the book.
Yeah, I mean,
really.
I agree with Katie. And also, you know, be realistic. It's, you know, you're not going to get someone with 8.5 million people, probably, unless you happen to know them or they happen to be your neighbor, to read your book and then tweet about it. So, you know, be realistic. But actually, certainly in the book industry, there is a huge amount of power in lots of small influencers, so book bloggers, and, you know, every book blogger will have genres they prefer, and therefore they will have audiences that prefer those genres. So don't be disheartened by thinking I could never reach those, you know, massive influencers on Instagram or wherever, on TikTok. You know, it's perfectly fine to start small, and the power of lots of small people will also sell your books. So, you know, reach out to book bloggers, but do it. I mean, I get approached very, very regularly, and I, you know, sometimes, you know, I have like Dear Pam and things like that. So, you know, I'd quite like them to use my my correct name. That's a starting point. But no, I'm sort of being facetious. But it is true that some approaches are really peculiar, as in I've obviously been just cut and paste into a massive email blast with millions of people, and there's no reference to who I am or, you know, why I would like the book, and no one is going to respond to that. So more homework, more targeted to the right people, and, you know, and read their blogs, because quite often they will say, I don't review these sort of books, or I do review these sort of books. If they don't review your books, don't bother. There's literally no point approaching them. So do a little bit of homework to get to the right people. More time spent ahead of, you know, is very well spent to get to a niche group of people who will be interested in your book. My whole sort of philosophy on really everything I do is, you know, if you don't ask, you don't get. So the worst case scenario is if you get an email of someone you think, oh, it'd be so amazing if they read my book, and you don't hear back, you know. I mean, we, as authors, you know, we have to have a thick skin. So that will happen. There will be no's. You've probably had rejections potentially if you've been going through the agent publisher route. So, you know, can think, okay, that's fine. It's not for them. Move on. So, you know, try to not be disheartened along the process, which I think it can be very disheartening. And, you know, ask people, you know, also if you have other people who connect with those people, think, oh, actually maybe they will help me do an intro to that person. You know, try and find ways around reaching them. Also, another way of sort of building a kind of audience is, you know, what you'll see on Twitter is there are lots of like collaborative groups around like debut. So there's like a debut 2022 Twitter group where they've all joined together and they've all sort of basically And they help promote each other's books, and they have a sort of, a website where they talk about each other's books. They each take it in turn to run the Twitter feed. So think about how you could potentially collaborate, because that's a really easy way to get to other people's readers, and you promote to yours. And you will. I mean, I'm a great believer in sort of stronger together. So definitely work with other authors. I think we're probably coming to an end. Do you have any sort of final things for the kind of getting the basics right, Katie?
I'm just going to look quickly. There's one, trying to balance long-term planning and daily nuts and bolts micro marketing eats up time you need to write. If there's one thing you prioritize, what would it be? I guess it would just be deciding on what your focus is, essentially. If you haven't got a lot of time, I would spend upfront time making a super clear plan, so you know what that time's going to be used doing. So I don't think that, I think there is no one thing. I think that will depend very much on the book and the genre and the audience, etc. But if you can just spend the upfront time just deciding, this is what my absolute focus is, and this is what I want to do each day to make that happen, then I think it's worth spending the time in advance doing that. I'm not sure if that's very helpful.
No, and I think we've also mostly covered things that don't really cost money. Well, of course it costs money to have a website, of course it costs money to have a newsletter, blah blah blah, but we're talking about sort of getting the basics right. We're not talking about paid for ads. We haven't really touched on that, so that is something we can talk about another time, about as in when you would choose to do Amazon ads or Facebook ads, sort of how much money you would sort of expect to start with and build on. So I would say, to that Facebook user, please do come back, because we will talk about other things that may well help you with this. But
and I think I'd like to do one of these specifically about like a marketing timeline, because I think that might be useful for people as well.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all could hear us and see us. I've really enjoyed it. It's great to chat to Katie, and we've got slightly different approaches, both of us, but hopefully you all gain something from both of us. Now, we also, I would say, is please encourage your friends to join up with the Facebook group, your author friends, because we're going to do a lot more of these. We also have author Q&As planned for 2022. I also have some experts in specific areas of book marketing who are going to do Q&As with us. So please encourage authors to join. It is all free, but we do have a Ko-fi or coffee or digital coffee account. What's that? Look, I need a coffee. So we will post that in the Facebook group. And if you do fancy buying Katie and I a coffee, that would be amazing, but obviously no pressure, but equally that would be lovely. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Katie, and we will be back. Oh yes, we'll be back in the new year. We're going to have a kind of 2022. There's going to be a workbook that we're going to send you ahead of time, and we will be planning for 2022. So that's when we can talk through a sort of timeline. So please do join us and encourage your friends to join us too. So thank you so much.
Bye.